We got a fun show for you today. We have some breakout candidates, but also Jamie's back from his little vacation at the ritzy Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach. Welcome back, Your Highness.
Well, thank you, sir.
Should we feed you grapes during the podcast today?
You know, when I called you on the way back from yesterday's quote unquote vacation, you had told me about your lunch.
Yeah.
you had a more fancy lunch than anything I had at the fancy hotel I was at. When I had a granola bar one day and a little bowl of fruit another day.
Yeah. So Jamie was at the Breakers for the owners' meetings. The owners were staying at the Breakers. Jamie was not. Very nice hotel. Anyway, we're going to talk about some of the takeaways from that. So we do have a bit of a newsy show, but we got what Jamie heard about Breece Hall, Rashee Rice, Isaiah Pacheco, Mark Andrews, Kenny Pickett, and Trevor Lawrence, and more. Plus breakouts from Jamie and Heath and Dave's reaction to it. And guys, I want to start with a Twitter poll. All right, so your breakouts list, like Jamie's got Caleb Williams on his. Heath has Caleb Williams and Bo Nix and Jayden Daniels. I'm sure we could all make a breakout case for Drake Maye. So obviously Jayden Daniels is the best sophomore quarterback. I didn't include J.J. McCarthy on this list, but let's go ahead and show this Twitter poll here. X poll, 6-point per passing touchdown league. Which quarterback are you drafting for your fantasy team? I was a little surprised by the results. Caleb Williams is currently edging out Bo Nix in first place. Caleb Williams has 40% of the vote, Bo Nix 37%, and Drake Maye about 23%. So I just used those three second-year quarterbacks. Who do you want in a 6-point per passing touchdown league? Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, or Drake Maye? Right now the results are Caleb 1, Bo Nix 2, and Drake Maye in a pretty distant third. Heath, how would you have voted here?
I would say Bo Nix. I understand leaning on the pedigree of Caleb Williams and the fact that he seemingly just got an enormous upgrade in terms of the coaching staff. And I wouldn't argue too hard against it. I certainly thought going into last year that Caleb Williams had a lot more upside than Bo Nix. But you know how my process works. Bo Nix was a lot better than Caleb. Like Caleb Williams could improve 15% in his fantasy production this coming season and still not be as good as Bo Nix was. And Bo Nix can certainly improve as well.
Caleb Williams was the number 22 quarterback per game. Bo Nix was the number 9 quarterback per game. If you remove week 18 for Bo Nix, where he scored 41.5 points against Chiefs backups, he would have been QB 10 per game. So still, it was a really impressive game. It boosted his numbers, but he still was a top 10 quarterback per game, even without week 18. Drake Maye it's hard to say with him because he was QB 28 per game, but he had 4 games where he left with an injury or barely played. So it was kind of tougher to say with him. Dave, how would you have voted in this poll?
I would have voted for Caleb. Bo Nix would have been second. Drake Maye would have been third. And it's all about, well, do you take what Bo Nix did and just assume that he's going to be about as good again? And then if you do that with Bo Nix, then you should probably do that with Caleb Williams. And then you get, where Heath's at, which is Bo Nix. He's proven that he can do this. And so you'll take him first. But with Caleb, the biggest issues that he had involved play calling / play design and offensive line woes. They've already fixed 3/5 of that offensive line in Chicago. And at bare minimum, the play design should be much better under Ben Johnson. Whether Ben Johnson can evolve Caleb Williams in one offseason from, holding the ball too long, trying to play Superman too often into a refined quarterback that'll take the easy throws and then still make big plays when those opportunities present itself, that remains to be seen. I'm banking on the upside for Caleb. That's why I'll take him first. We're also not talking about one of your first 6 or 7 picks on draft day. But Bo Nix is still a really good option if you don't want Caleb Williams or if you miss on Caleb Williams, knowing that he should still be in that 22 PPR. I did it again. 22 or more fantasy point per game range.
Jamie, how would you have voted in this poll?
Same way as Dave. I think you look at, all three of these guys have gotten an upgrade in some way, shape, or form. Williams and Maye have gotten the biggest upgrades. Nick's getting Evan Ingram, but Williams, as Dave alluded to, play caller and offensive line. There's still probably the opportunity to get another receiver, especially if Keenan Allen doesn't return as expected. Drake Maye, new play caller as well, new weapon as well. They're clearly not done also. So you're hoping that the upgrades for Williams and Maye close the gap from where Nix was last year by comparison to those guys. I think the nice part about all three of these quarterbacks is you could probably take two of them, and the best pairing would probably be to take one of the two guys who struggled with Bo Nix. So if you believe that Nix can sort of play at the same level, then you take him as sort of he's my fallback option. Those other two guys, if they take the leaps that they could potentially get to, it might be a little bit better than what Bo Nix certainly how he performed last year. So that's kind of the approach I would take with all three of these quarterbacks. Is you probably need to pair them with someone else. Nick's probably the one you don't need to pair with anyone else if you just want to sort of hope that he replicates what he did a year ago. But I think the upside for Williams is a little bit higher, and the upside for Maye will get closer to where Nix was last year and where I think Williams can get to.
Yeah, I want to bring in Thomas here because Thomas commented on my Twitter poll and he said he'd take JJ McCarthy, which hopefully was a joke. But
no, he can't jump on the McCarthy train now. He was all Aaron Rodgers. You got to let McCarthy play itself out first.
It doesn't matter who the quarterback is for the Vikings. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is for the Vikings. That's who you want on your fantasy team.
That's a pretty good take.
Yeah, he might be the best, but I don't think you could justify drafting him. But I have a question for you, Thomas. I would like to share my screen, but it's a very technologically pathetic thing that I'm going to share here. Can I share a Word document? How would you feel about that as the producer of this?
Oh man,
I mean, you're already talking about it, so you might as well just show us.
Right? I just want to make sure. I'm going to say this is. Can you guys see that? Should I boost it? Should I zoom in a little?
Yeah, you can zoom in on
this. This is great work.
All right, so these are 17 game paces.
This is why we win awards.
Yeah, 17 game paces for all four. Oh wait, Heath, you're muted.
Maybe zoom in just a little bit more.
Zoom in more? Okay. Like a lot more?
Yeah, like twice as much.
How's that?
Wow.
Okay. So these are 17 game paces for the four rookie quarterbacks, Daniels, Williams, Maye, Nix. This removes any game that they left with injuries. 2 of those for Daniels, 3 of those for Drake Maye, and it didn't include only his starts. So 3 starts for Drake Maye, nothing for Caleb Williams, nothing for Bo Nix. You see the 17 game pace. Caleb Williams is by far the worst. 3 of them were on pace for 26 to 29 touchdown passes. Caleb Williams was on pace for 20. He did excel in limiting interceptions, though. You see the rushing totals here. Like Daniels blows everyone away. But Caleb Williams on pace. Caleb Williams and Bo Nix all on pace for 81 to 92 rushes. Bo Nix 430-yard pace. Caleb Williams 489-yard pace. Drake Maye 625-yard pace. I would say completely unsustainable yards per carry. He had the highest yards per carry by a quarterback since 2011, when Christian Ponder and Michael Vick both averaged 7.8 yards per carry, which is what Maye averaged there. But I just want everybody to kind of take a look at what they did. Drake Maye was almost as prolific of a passer, you could say, as Jayden Daniels. Same amount of yards, 2 fewer touchdowns, but a lot of interceptions when you just look at their healthy starts. So hopefully this hilarious Microsoft Word document is actually helpful for people who are watching on YouTube right now.
Well, and the only other thing I want to add is I think when Dave said what Caleb Williams' 2 biggest problems last year were, that was letting him off the hook a little
yes.
bit. Like Caleb Williams' biggest problems last year, in my opinion, were the fact that he did exactly what we were worried he was going to do coming out of college, which was running around with the ball way too much and try to play hero ball. And then his other problem was that his on-target percentage was one of the lowest amongst quarterbacks who threw enough to count. Like Anthony Richardson, Cooper Rush, Jameis Winston were worse. Aiden O'Connell was worse. Dak Prescott in a few games. Bryce Young was worse. But he was highly inaccurate, and often when he was throwing to Rome Odunze.
And the sacks. So I wanted to talk about that. I want to talk about Caleb Williams' sacks and Drake Maye's interceptions. Which one should we start with?
Caleb.
Okay. Caleb Williams sacks, 28.2% sack per pressure rate. That was second worst in the NFL. Only Will Levis was worse. If you look at sack per pressure rate, you just go year by year and look at the guys who have the worst sack per pressure rate. And I'm gonna use sack per pressure rate instead of sack per drop back rate. I feel like maybe that gives us a little bit better idea of quarterback versus offensive line. How good are you at avoiding that pressure? This is a really bad list. This is mostly bad quarterbacks. Not exclusively, but I'll give you a little bit of hope for Drake Maye, for Caleb Williams. 28.2% sack per pressure rate. As a rookie, Kyler Murray, 26.1%. He has been so much better in his career since then. There was one, Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson as a rookie, 29.7%. And he got much better. So I can give you those two examples of guys who were really bad as rookies and much, much better throughout their career.
I think that's good. I also think like it's worth remembering that those guys, while they've gotten really good at that, are still probably two of the guys that a lot of coaches think hold the ball too long. Like Russell Wilson is still like he gets blamed for things. It's holding on to the ball too long, right?
But doesn't that kind of mean that you can hold on to the ball too long and still be a successful quarterback? You just have to.
It is possible,
right?
I think if you believe in Ben Johnson, then you're going to believe in Caleb Williams, because this is a guy that passed on jobs last year and had essentially his pick of jobs. I don't know how many, but he definitely had an opportunity to take multiple jobs this year. Jacksonville was certainly in the mix. Chicago's in the mix. I don't remember who else. I think there was one other team. He took this job because of Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
And so
right.
If you believe that he is going to be good at this, then it's going to be because he makes Caleb Williams good.
Let me talk to you about Drake Maye's interception rate. Drake Maye had a 3% interception rate, was the 7th worst in the NFL last year. Nobody good had a higher interception rate than him. Baker Mayfield and Dak Prescott were close. They were at 2.8%. But in the last 15 years, which rookies had a higher interception rate than Drake Maye in their rookie seasons?
How many years?
15 years.
2010 and on.
Geno Smith, Deshaun Kaiser, Christian Ponder, Josh Allen, Justin Fields, Sam Darnold, Blake Bortles, Josh Rosen, Brandon Weeden, Cam Newton. Those are the only quarterbacks who had a higher rookie interception rate in the last 15 years.
Well, he ended on a high note.
I ended with Cam Newton, but it's not like he was a great passer. He was obviously a great rusher. Josh Allen was in there. He stands out. But again, a pretty bad list there. A big problem for Drake Maye.
I really don't care at all.
No?
Yeah.
I just assume that's going to get better. He was a much more accurate passer than Caleb Williams was. The fact that he had a much higher percentage intercepted doesn't really bother me.
Isn't that letting him off the hook a little bit?
Yes, Heath, it is.
I'm more concerned about a quarterback playing hero ball in the pocket and taking too many sacks and developing out of that than I am throwing 27 interceptions his rookie year.
Right. So I would want to go back and look at those interceptions and see how many of them are really on Drake compared to
8 of 10. I looked at them today. 2 of them were drops.
Okay.
One of them, maybe you could argue, I think it was Pop Douglas. He wasn't looking. Maybe it was a route issue, but at least 7, if not 8 of 10.
Okay.
I
That's
think
still a lot. It's not great, but that's how it goes, especially in the case of Maye, who we knew coming into the year was not a polished product and not a ready-to-go quarterback. The Patriots knew that, and they told us that because they didn't start him right away.
All right.
Also, like 7 interceptions last year would have been an exceptionally good interception rate. We're talking about a really small sample size. Taking 1 interception away changes things drastically.
Okay, you're right. He was an interception. In his junior year of college, he threw some picks, but Peyton Manning had a 4.9% interception rate in his career. As Heath, I think
the thing with both these guys is they're getting significant coaching upgrades, and that this is going to be the telling point for both of these quarterbacks for how their career may go. I mean, look at what Trevor Lawrence has gone through. With coaching change after coaching change after coaching change for a guy who was considered to be such a high prospect and has just struggled.
Yeah.
And so does getting Ben Johnson and Josh McDaniels and what those guys have done with other quarterbacks in their careers, does that help these two guys get to the point where they're hopefully going to get to,
Right.
and I think just to tie it back to what we talk about here, these are not, like Dave said, they're not guys you're taking early in your drafts. These are fallback quarterbacks. These are late round options to an extent. Williams will go ahead of, Drake Maye, and probably Bo Nix by the time we see what ADP looks like. And so if you're drafting appropriately, so if you're taking these guys, you're probably taking two quarterbacks. You're hopefully getting somebody that's a little bit more stable. So if they struggle, certainly they struggle early, you have somebody that you can pivot to and still get you the points that you need.
You also don't have to take two quarterbacks because there will still be some decent quarterbacks on the waiver wire after your draft is over that you can go and pick up.
And by the way, last thing, and we'll take a break here and get to the rest of the show. There was a quarterback who had the third highest sack rate, and loading. Where is he? Like the 8th highest interception rate in the NFL last year. And that was Baker Mayfield. And I just want to point out, you don't want to be near the top of these lists. And he was definitely near the top of the sack rate list. Not terrible. I mean, 2.8% interception rate. When I was just telling you Drake Maye's was 3%. It's not so good. So just something to think about. Baker does do a lot of things that are pretty dangerous. And I think he led the NFL in fumbles last year as well and only lost 2 of them. All right, let's take a break here. Before we do that, I want to tell you about the With the First Pick podcast. All right, they are doing really cool things right now. So for all of you have a favorite football team out there, the With the First Pick podcast, they're releasing full 7-round mock drafts for each team. So I think they just released like the Arizona Cardinals. So check and see if your team is, out there right now. You go hear how your team might approach the NFL draft. But this is a great way to get acquainted with the draft prospects and hear from experts in the field. So that's the With the First Pick podcast. Go to cbssports.com/podcasts to see all of our shows. We'll be right back after this. I want to start the show with that quarterback conversation because I do think that a lot of people are going to want one of the 3 quarterbacks as a backup, if not a starter on their team. They have to choose who. So I look forward to having that debate throughout the offseason, and things could obviously change after the NFL draft. Now, let's get to the news and notes here. Most of this coming from the owners' meetings, and a lot of this, Jamie got on his little recorder as well, and we'll be writing about it on the website. But Nick Sirianni did not commit to Dallas Goedert staying on the roster. He said he's on the team for now. So here's 16 games over the last 3 seasons. Devontae Smith with A.J. Brown, but without Dallas Goedert. I guess I should give you his 17-game pace in those 16 games. 94 catches, 1,353 yards, 12 touchdowns on 129 targets. His points per game, Devontae Smith, his points per game in those games would have made him wide receiver 6 in non-PPR, 8 in half PPR, 9th in full PPR last year, and even better in 2023. So in conclusion, over the last 3 seasons, 16 games without Dallas Goedert and with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith has been a top 10 wide receiver. Art Rooney, the owner of the Steelers, he's optimistic about signing Aaron Rodgers. He kind of sounds like it's going to happen. Todd Bowles is hoping.
There was some talk yesterday that they thought it was going to be done.
Yeah. Todd Bowles hoping Chris Godwin is ready for week 1. Kyle Shanahan said Christian McCaffrey is healthy and doing great. You guys feeling that?
Yeah. I mean, it's, as you sort of alluded to, I think last week that, did not have surgery on his knee. So that's a positive. We thought that might have been the case. Said that he could have played in the playoffs had they made it. So again, Kyle Shanahan said that in week 1. Let's take that for what it's worth. Based on where he may end up getting drafted, could be one of the best value picks in your league. It's just a matter of when we had Dan on and Dan said he's his number 2 running back right now. If people still feel like that, then you could be in a little bit of trouble if he's, clearly not the same guy. But the way the 49ers are operating right now seems as if they're going back to being all in on McCaffrey, which is a very positive sign.
Okay. Carolina head coach Dave Canales said he thinks Xavier Legette is a number 1 wide receiver. They asked, "Hey, do you need a number one wide receiver?" Like, I think we got that in Xavier or whatever he called him. Kevin O'Connell said Jordan Mason will be a 1B in the Minnesota backfield. We're going to talk about Breece Hall in a second, but Jets head coach Aaron Gled said he wants to use all three running backs. So he didn't. It wasn't a great quote in terms of Breece Hall, but we'll talk about that momentarily.
Super, and they've got a running quarterback now too, so that's fun.
Rashee Rice on track to be ready for training camp. He tore his LCL in week 4. The Cardinals signed defensive lineman Calais Campbell to a 1-year deal, $5.5 million. Denver's GM said they're going to draft a running back. Very honest assessment there, so I think that's not a surprise. John Harbaugh said he fully expects Mark Andrews to be on the team. He's going to be a Raven this season, it seems. So all right, here we go. Let's get a quick reaction from Dave. An 18-game season seems more likely. Give me like a 3-word reaction.
More work for everybody.
Touchbacks will go to the 35-yard line.
Means that DSTs will matter a little bit more. Maybe even considerably more.
Replay assists will allow referees to reverse penalties for face masks, tripping, horse collars.
Love it. They need this.
Yeah. Each team will be guaranteed a possession in overtime, even in the regular season.
Love that too.
The NFL will further discuss, they haven't decided yet, they will further discuss making playoff seeding based on record rather than winning the division.
I'm mostly indifferent to that.
I think it's amazing. Teams can wear alternate jerseys now 4 times a season instead of 3.
Wait a minute. I don't know if I can express myself in just a few words for that. Amazing news. Just the ramifications are huge.
16 of 32 NFL teams support banning the tush push, and it will be discussed at a later date.
It's a health issue, not a cheating issue.
Okay, Jamie, let's talk about your AFC notes here and what Aaron Glenn said about Breece Hall. Let's talk about that and start with that. What were your takeaways from what Jets head coach Aaron Glenn said about Breece?
I mean, I hate it. You never want to hear 3 backs. We get nervous when we hear 2 backs. So for a guy in Breece Hall who, as we saw 2 years ago, where we were concerned a little bit, because of the post ACL, looked amazing and came back last year. He was the number 2 player, not number 2 running back, number 2 player based on CBS Sports average draft position. Was a bust. Struggled mostly second half of the season. His receptions went down when Devontae Adams joined the roster. And so the hope would have been, okay, coming back this season, that could be a featured guy. Now, Aaron Glenn comes from Detroit. I know he's defense coordinator, but they had a very successful tandem, as we're well aware. So the fact that he's already looking at it with his coaching staff and saying that not only do they like Braylon Allen, but they also like Isaiah Davis, that we could be looking at all 3 of these guys getting touches. Like, this is terrifying if you're going to, buy into Breece Hall bouncing back. He should still be a starting fantasy running back. He should still be drafted, I think, as a number 2 fantasy running back. But, for a guy that had, I think, just a pretty big, pendulum swing of maybe going in mid-round 2 to now potentially late round 3, I could see him anywhere in that range, maybe even round 4.
So another note that you had. Andy Reid said that Isaiah Pacheco probably shouldn't have come back. I mean, most guys probably haven't come back, but if you know him for a minute, he wasn't going to be held back. That was Reid talking about Pacheco returning from the injury and not really playing that well down the stretch. How realistic do you think it is that Isaiah Pacheco will end up with a higher ADP than Breece Hall?
I don't think ADP will be realistic. Would not be surprising if Pacheco's better than Hall, but I don't think it's realistic that he will get drafted ahead of Hall unless we see significant reports and a lot of traction of Pacheco is back to being Pacheco, and the guy that we saw the first 2 games of the season and the season before is there. And Elijah Mitchell, for example, won't matter. Kareem Hunt won't matter. And that Breece Hall is rotating heavily in practice and whatever with Allen and Davis.
Could anybody see that? Can anybody see Pacheco rising above Breece Hall or Breece Hall?
No.
Assuming that Breece Hall is healthy, no.
Okay. Also, what did Andy Reid say about Elijah Mitchell?
Just what you expect about a new player. He's excited about him. The one thing that he did, sort of reference unsolicited was, what he likes about him as a pass catcher. And so he used the words, you can flex him out and use him in the passing game that way. So did they find their new Jerick McKinnon, their receiving option? He talked about his health, again, unsolicited, saying, when he was healthy in San Francisco, he was really good. So I'm sure they're viewing him as a compliment as opposed to a replacement for Pacheco, again, based on both comments in regards to his backs. So the thing we'll have to figure out is who's the handcuff and who's the number 2 running back there in Kansas City, because Kareem Hunt, we know, is a guy that they're familiar with and comfortable with, as we saw last year. But is Mitchell the one that you want to get because of maybe the upside based on age, based on, where he's at in his career comparatively to Kareem Hunt? So it'll be curious to see how these two guys compete with each other, assuming Pacheco is back, just, unquestioned as the lead guy.
That's an interesting comment about him as a pass catcher, because even in his big breakout year in 2021, Elijah Mitchell had 20 targets, 19 catches, 137 yards, and 1 touchdown. In the 2 years since, 12 targets, 9 catches, 21 yards, no touchdowns. I'm going to look at what he did in college. Not like an amazing track record of catching the ball in college. So this is something that either Andy Reid is just BSing about, or he really sees something there that maybe Mitchell does take a step forward as far as the pass catcher goes. But that would be a little surprising.
I wouldn't go in planning to target him for his reception totals, but it could be something that, again, new coach, new system. Clearly he's coming from a great place, so it's not like he's coming from a bad team and bad offense. But again, this is now Andy Reid's project to an extent, and we'll see if that helps.
You heard John Harbaugh talking about Mark Andrews and saying he's working really hard. I do fully expect him to be playing for us next year. He's just too good a player. I just want to throw out a comparison here. Mark Andrews last year averaged 11.1 PPR fantasy points per game. He had in 17 games only 69 targets, and he had 11 touchdowns. So 11.1 fantasy points per game. Does that remind you of any tight end in the last 5 years?
Eric Ebron? That was 10 years.
I was going Robert Tonyan. Robert Tonyan averaged 11.8 points per game, which is better than Andrews last year. In 2020, he had 59 targets in 15 games. Andrews had 69 in 17 games. And Tonyan also caught 11 touchdowns, 52 catches, 586 yards, 11 touchdowns, compared to Andrews, 55 catches, 673 yards, 11 touchdowns, 17 games. Like, I really hope he's not Robert Tonyan, but we see if he's going to be targeted 69 times in 17 games, that's a guy that could be dropped if he doesn't keep scoring touchdowns at a ridiculous pace.
I mean, there were people considering dropping him in the early part of the season last year. So it's just a matter, I think, of when you're drafting him. So if you're reaching for him based on what his resume is, then you're probably going to be somewhat disappointed if that's replicated. If you're drafting him at a value because people are concerned and he falls to the right spot, if he's one of the late tight ends, I'll take him all day long.
Isn't this who he kind of is now, though? Because even in 2023, 6.1 targets per game in 10 games, 13.5 PPR points per game.
I'll take 6 targets per game, though.
I was going to say, I think this is all a little bit insulting to Mark Andrews.
Right.
Like, Robert Tonyan had 14 career catches in 2 years before he had his 11 touchdown season. If Mark Andrews is Robert Tonyan, he's not Robert Tonyan.
No, I know that, but he also had 69 targets in 17 games.
He had a down year in terms of target volume, and I think that's concerning for a projection this year. And you don't draft him as a top 3 tight end like we used to because of that. But he's also an elite tight end who made up for the lack of targets by scoring a bunch of touchdowns.
Yes, he did. All right, Christian Kirk. Let's talk about Christian Kirk, Jamie, and what his head coach, D'Amico Ryan, said about him.
Sounds like he's going to be their slot receiver, which is interesting given what their depth chart looks like right now. So they're going to add somebody else, presumably. But that's what he said. Going to make a lot of plays for us on third down, going to do it from the slot, and going to be a good target for CJ Stroud. Was very praiseworthy of his speed. So sees him obviously doing some things. He said, playing in the slot and making plays from the slot down the field. So it's definitely we talked about Devontae Adams, his landing spot. This was a great scenario for Christian Kirk where he ended up. knowing that there's guys hurt. I didn't give you the Tank Dell quote, but he gave the typical player hurt comment about a guy that may not play. I got the same thing from Dave Canales. I only gave you AFC stuff. You brought up a lot of the NFC stuff already in the news and notes, so I'll give you some different stuff tomorrow. But he did say, Canales, also about Jonathan Brooks. He's attacking the rehab, strongly. That anytime I hear that they're probably not going to see him anytime soon. So with Tank Dell not most likely playing a good portion of the 2025 season, if at all, Kirk just, again, could be one of the best value picks that we see. Guy that has proven to be a good fantasy receiver on a lower end scale, got the opportunity first year in Jacksonville to be, very successful. I think we'll probably be somewhere between that, but I think can be a consistent starter in 3 receiver leagues by the time the season's over.
All right. And then just give me one more here. You can either talk about the Browns quarterback situation or Trevor Lawrence.
Well, I mean, Trevor Lawrence is just trying to get healthy. Liam Cohen's excited to work with him. I think the Browns situation is very interesting because of where they're picking, so have the number 2 overall pick. And it seems like, just based on the things you heard coming out of the meetings, that they're probably not taking a quarterback at 2. So if they don't take a quarterback at 2, at what point do they get back into the draft and take a quarterback? And Stefanski said, we haven't gone through the draft yet, but did speak highly of Kenny Pickett. And so are we going to get to a point in the season, early in the season, where Kenny Pickett is the starter for the Browns, and then the trickle-down effect of what that means for David Njoku and Jerry Jeudy, most importantly, but also, does Pickett have an opportunity here to be relevant in super flex leagues and 2 quarterback leagues and maybe a waiver wire option at some point, for 1 quarterback league? So they've had success with backup quarterbacks, as we know, in the system, so it's hard to just, completely dismiss it. Joe Flacco came off his couch and was great. Obviously, Jameis Winston was great. You can sort of compare those 2 guys to Kenny Pickett, and clearly those 2 guys have much better resumes, fantasy and reality. But Pickett may end up being, someone who matters, and, hopefully he's able just to connect with Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku if he's the starter. So if you're sitting there right now in your dynasty leagues and, shallow formats, and Kenny Pickett and super flex or 2 QB leagues was not available, or you want to trade for him, might not be a bad idea to get him, cheap, just to see what happens. Again, these are guys that bye weeks, injuries, they could certainly matter at some point.
Good stuff. All right. For more on Jamie's takeaways from the owners' meetings and his vacation in the sand in the Breakers, just read it all on cbssports.com/fantasy.
They have wonderful tennis courts at the Breakers.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
I guess I should stay there then.
I still think you probably did more tennis and luxurious things than I did in the 2 days I was on vacation.
Which 2 days?
Monday and Tuesday.
Yeah, I did play tennis Tuesday night. Oh, no, Monday night. Monday night I played. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's get to some breakouts here. So the mutual breakouts that Jamie and Heath both had on their list were Caleb Williams, Ken Walker, and Bucky Irving. Ken Walker and Bucky Irving. Heath, what round do you think Walker and Irving should be drafted in?
I think we're probably looking at the round 2-3 range. I think that it shouldn't be surprising at all if both these guys go before Breece Hall. And listen, if the coaching staff keeps talking about Walker like he's kind of the clear starter and Zach Charbonnet is a good complementary back, then maybe Walker goes in the first half of round 2.
I don't think people will do that. Where's he been going in our drafts? I mean, I feel like Walker's probably going to have a late round 3 ADP. That's just my Dave. You can feel that?
Yeah, I do, because enough people have been burned by Walker that they're going to go, I can't trust this guy.
Right.
To me, it all comes down to how often he's going to get 15 plus touches per game. That's his magic number. I went back and checked this morning because I knew we were going to talk about it. Past 3 seasons, when he's had 15 or more touches in a game, there's been 30 of them. 16.8 PPR points per game. Awesome. Like it's not second round worthy. It's close to, maybe it is second round worthy, but toward the end of the second round, but it's not exactly, dynamo for fantasy, but a very good fantasy average. When he doesn't get them, there have been 12 games under 15 touches. Some of them are games he's left early. 7.8 PPR points per game. That's cringe. So I am hoping that the Seahawks are true to their word, that they want to run the ball more and they want Walker to be the guy who does it. But I also want to see them improve their offensive line. And they haven't really done a good job of that this offseason. So I'm going to be a little skittish on Walker. As of now, I still have Breace Hall and Kenneth Walker in my rankings.
I would take Ken Walker ahead of Brees Hall. I was doing it before Aaron Glenn's comments. I certainly will do it now after Aaron Glenn's comments. The thing that stands out to me about what Walker did last year the most was his involvement in the passing game.
Yep.
And it would not be shocking with Justin Fields at quarterback for the Jets and Sam Darnold at quarterback for the Seahawks that Ken Walker has more receptions than Brees Hall. And no one in a million years would have ever thought that going into last season. So now, based on what they both did last year and based on what's the situation at hand for both of them this year, if the receiving totals are even close or in the favor of Ken Walker, he may be significantly better.
And they don't have DK Metcalf, right? I mean, so that's only a bigger boost to his receiving.
Well, I mean, they do have Cooper Kupp.
They do have Cooper Kupp. That's true. And then Bucky Irving. I mean, he keeps getting drafted in the third round in our drafts. Heath, do you have NFC ADP to reference for these?
I will shortly, and someone else should talk, and then I'll tell you.
All right. Yeah.
I think he's a round 2 pick. I wouldn't be surprised if, the hype gets, I don't know, out of control, but, based on what he did last year while in the initial phases of when he was breaking out, sharing with Rachaad White, and then as we got to the end of the season, giving him more work and him handling it well. I mean, the sky's the limit for him, So I know Dan, the last time I was on, at least, was concerned about the draft capital when he was selected and the success rate of those guys. Again, I think we just got to move the goalposts on how running backs are viewed. So if a team doesn't draft you in the first day and even on day 2, I don't think that necessarily means you don't have an opportunity to be successful. It's the same head coach. It's the same coach that was in the building with them. So to Heath's point about when these guys break out and then there's a coaching change, and that's when those guys have failed, the James Robinsons of the world. Bucky Irving's still on the same, I think, path to being the guy for Tampa. And Rachaad White, I know is a factor, but I don't think is that much of a speed bump in him having a breakout season.
The most encouraging thing from last year, he only had 3 games, including the postseason, Adam, where he played at least 60% of the snaps. So we're talking already about a running back who got it done, not with just touchdowns or not with just catches, just efficiency across the board. And if he gets more playing time and more touches and he keeps that efficiency, then what's stopping him from being close to a top 5 fantasy running back? If he's a tackle breaker, playing behind a good offensive line, it should be pretty damn good.
Bucky's currently he's currently the 19th pick by ADP at NFC. Brees Hall is 31st. Ken Walker is 44th.
Wow. Yeah, what's stopping Bucky Irving? He was from weeks 10 through 18. I didn't include. No, I must have included week 14. He played only 16% of the snaps in week 14. But from weeks 10 through 18, he was the number 6 running back per game. He averaged 5.8 yards per carry. He was on pace for 51 catches. He was ridiculous. So good.
Yeah.
And I don't know what stops him. I guess I would say he's not going to be the third down back. And he's probably not going to, average 5.4 yards per carry again. He's small.
there is an offensive coordinator change. Like the offense could just not be as good.
That's what I'm thinking because
it's an in-house guy, though. That's the thing that's encouraging.
That helps.
But yeah, we don't know what that change does mean. You got to be fair to Heath on this. It doesn't mean that it's going to be, a drastic blow up of the offense. And personally, I never like it when a new offensive coordinator is using the previous offensive coordinator's playbook. So I think that's just one of those things that you're going to have to wait and see.
I know what you're saying, though, Dave. But again, he was part of that planning process.
But didn't the Eagles 2 years ago when they lost their they hired in-house?
It went awful.
It was a disaster, right?
But guys were hurt, though. I mean, that's I don't know how much of the coordinator change was a factor in the failures so much and the play calling so much.
I don't know if they were calling plays because I think Sirianni may have been calling.
I mean, look at Patrick Mahomes after he lost Eric Bieniemy.
Maybe
Matt Nagy effect. Chicagoans will have a chill down their spine with it. Oh, look, I mean, if there is just a philosophical decision amongst the coaches in Tampa that we can't overwork Bucky Irving, then there's a little bit of worry that what if his efficiency takes a step back, and that's certainly reasonable to expect after the year he's just coming off of. It was amazing.
I think
just
it's
have to
worth
wait.
saying. Like, I know Bucky Irving was really good with 3 running backs touching the football last year, but I don't think the comments of Tampa Bay about their running back usage are that much different than the comments of Aaron Glenn about Brees Hall's usage. Like,
Yeah,
Bucky Irving is going to be our lead back. Rashad White's going to play a lot, and we need to get Sean Tucker out there more. Like, they're both 3 back systems.
And all that being said, if any one of those running backs on the Bucks or the Jets just ends up being head and shoulders better than the others, then you can bet your butt that they'll change that philosophy.
Yeah.
And the Bucks did. The Bucks did it.
So in that stretch where Irving was a top 6 running back per game, he was on pace for 264 carries and 51 catches, which is probably not going to give you a first round value in all likelihood, but definitely could give you second round value.
I mean, in today's NFL, though, 300 total touches is pretty impressive.
Yep.
In 17 games, yeah, right. And then it's 315 total touches. Okay. All right. So those are the mutual guys. And why don't we take a break? We'll get back to some more breakouts in a moment. We'll be right back on Fantasy Football Today.
Guys, can you feel it? Legends were born here. History was made here. These are hallowed grounds.
Hallowed grounds? The NCIS squad room?
Well, I wasn't talking about that, but I was talking about Augusta National.
All right. It's finally time for the Masters. I hear it's a tradition unlike any other.
Let's do some rapid fire breakouts. Okay, Jamie, let's go through your list first. You give me like a 20 to 30 second breakout case for each guy. Ready? Jaylen Warren.
If he's the lead guy for the Steelers, he has top 20 upside given the fact of what he showed in 2023, his ability to catch passes out of the backfield. So we have to see who the quarterback is. But this team, I think, will still run the ball because of Arthur Smith, and the situation is extremely favorable. Mike Tomlin did speak very highly of Kenneth Gainwell. That's a plus for me for Jaylen Warren. Kenneth Gainwell is the number 2 running back there.
Jordan Addison.
Just the opportunity for him to continue to build on what he's shown each of his first 2 seasons. He benefits from a lot of single coverage in an offense that's very pass friendly. If J.J. McCarthy is as good as advertised based on what Kevin O'Connell has said, then Jordan Addison will be one of the best value picks because he will not get drafted as a starter in 2 receiver leagues, but can still be a starter in 2 receiver leagues and an easy starter in 3 receiver leagues.
Let's see who's next on your breakouts list. It is Rome Odunze.
And just a huge opportunity, if he's the slot guy has been mentioned for Ben Johnson. We know what that means based on what Amon-Ra St. Brown did in Detroit. But I'll go back to the conversation we had with Dan that I don't think it matters if these 2 guys in terms of DJ Moore and Rome Odunze are locked into being featured roles in this offense. So whether he's the Jameson Williams guy, whether he's the Amon-Ra St. Brown guy, he's going to get fed targets. He's going to hopefully have a better quarterback, as we've talked about, and certainly a better system. So for a guy with his pedigree, for somebody who probably get drafted as a high-end number 3 receiver, can easily be a top 20 guy in year 2.
Ricky Pearsall.
What we saw the last 2 games hopefully is replicable for the course of the season, not to the same, extent, consistency, week in, week out. But Brandon Ayuk's coming off a torn ACL, no Deebo Samuel. Brock Purdy hopefully won't have a holdout. If he's a starter, first round pick coming out of college, a guy that can get open. I think as we saw as the season went on, what he suffered at the start of, the season, end of training camp after getting shot, to come back and let alone play successfully, just in this offense, there's immense upside.
And Tucker Kraft, who is on Dave's sleepers list.
Yeah, I think sleeper breakout will be kind of determined on, how you view his ADP and, what you think the expectations are. But no Christian Watson, which I know that wasn't necessarily his best moments when Watson wasn't there. But LaFleur already talked about getting him more involved. We saw last year, right, hovering around 10 PPR points per game. I think he can get to maybe 11 or 12, so can be a guy who will be drafted as a low end starter, but may, creep into the top 5 range, if he gets a couple more touchdown opportunities. So LaFleur did talk about this. I'll give you tomorrow, being a little bit more pass friendly and throwing the ball a little bit more. So that should benefit everybody. He did actually specifically say they wanted to limit Jayden Reed's carries because of fear of injury. So hopefully he touches the ball a little bit more in the passing game too. But I think Tucker Kraft, just based on where you'll draft him and the upside that he should be able to give you, has the chance to, be a top 6 or 7 tight end as opposed to just maybe a top 10 guy.
All right, so Jaylen Warren, Jordan Addison, Rome Odunze, Ricky Pearsall, Tucker Kraft. Those are Jamie's breakouts that were not shared ones with Heath. Does anybody, Dave, Heath, you have anything to say about Warren, Addison, Odunze, Pearsall, Kraft?
I'll start by saying that I think definitely in the case of Odunze, Pearsall, and Kraft, but potentially in the case of all 5, no one's drafting them close to their ceiling. And that's what makes them especially appealing. Because we'll talk about breakouts, like Bucky Irving as a breakout, for example. You're drafting him pretty close to his ceiling as it is. These guys, like Warren, if he truly goes the rest of the offseason without any additions to the Steelers' backfield, we're probably going to draft him close to the 20th running back off the board in full PPR leagues. And that might be a little too close to the ceiling. Same thing with Addison, who is, you'll draft him as a number 3 receiver. Maybe he could be a top 24 guy. I do love how they changed his role mid-year in Minnesota. Made all the difference in the world. But those last 3 guys, super talented in the case of Odunze and Pearsall. They can really do a lot. I think we just scratched the surface with them last year. And then Tucker Kraft, an after-catch monster, who would benefit by more playing time and more passes in Green Bay. I like all 5, but those last 3, very, very appealing for fantasy drafting.
I'm sorry, which 3?
Odunze, Pearsall, Kraft.
Have you gone over the tape of Odunze? I just kind of wish there were more highlights.
If Caleb Williams would have thrown the ball within 10 feet of him,
yeah,
then Rome Odunze would have had more highlights. Like it was incredible, and I remember watching it happen during the season. Like Caleb's best throws seemed to almost exclusively be to DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, and he'd throw the ball to Rome Odunze, and he'd throw like a 700-mile-an-hour fastball from 6 yards away that just like bounced off. It was really, really bad. Odunze, I think if you watch the film on Odunze, you'll be like, man, this guy did not have very many opportunities to make plays last year.
I did watch some going into our episode a few weeks ago where we talked about sophomore wide receivers, and it felt like down the stretch, the whole offense was so much of the offense was designed for DJ Moore, and Odunze was just kind of like a spectator. But I'm actually curious to see what his open score was on the ESPN analytics. I'm guessing it probably wasn't that good, but let's see. Because Malik Neighbors was number 1. Odunze was 89th out of 100. And this was including tight ends. I don't know, not that good, but not that bad. Not that bad.
I'm fascinated to see Odunze and Marvin Harrison in year 2. Like those 2 guys, based on what we thought of them coming into the league, where they were drafted, how they performed. I'll give you some Marvin Harrison stuff tomorrow, but what those 2 can hopefully do in year 2.
Jordan Addison on this list, he was wide receiver like 24 per game, I think, somewhere around there. Yeah, 25. Can he be better than that? Do you think what's his upside, Addison?
I mean, barring injury,
yeah,
so barring a Justin Jefferson injury,
per game.
I don't think significantly better. But I don't think anybody's drafting him that high.
Yeah, probably not. 14.2 PPR fantasy points per game. All right, Heath, let's get to your breakout.
There. I don't know if I'm missing anybody, but there are 3 guys I think that kind of fall in a very similar category, and you'll understand why. It's Devontae Smith, Jaylen Waddle, and Jordan Addison.
Number 2 guys.
But have really never fulfilled their potential consistently.
Consistently, right? Yeah.
All it takes is for Addison to not be a red zone monster, and he tanks.
True.
Right. He's good. I feel like he's a good player, though, and all of them, right? Good players. They're first-round picks. They haven't really had the opportunity.
Like you brought up one scenario: Dallas Goedert leaves, Devontae Smith becomes a top 10 option. In all formats, right? Based on his 16-game pace. So you'll probably draft him, let's say, as a top 20 receiver. I know I'll rank him as a top 20 receiver if Goddard's gone. If Tyreek Hill is traded, right, which is still potential.
Yeah.
Jaylen Waddle, we had the first mock draft we did. Remember, everybody was, Dave took Jaylen Waddle. Everybody was like, oh my God, I can't believe he lasted this long. He's got so much upside. That was the Tyreek Hill peace sign after the draft, and now we're getting it again on Twitter of him, maybe getting shipped out. He'll be a top 20 fantasy receiver. And if we know, God forbid, something happens to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison's arrow just, rocket ship skyrockets.
Yeah, I think the questions I would have are what is Jonnu Smith's role and what is TJ Hawkinson's role?
Well, they'll have roles, but I mean, these guys just become infinitely better.
Yeah, I'm not gonna play the what if Justin Jefferson gets hurt game, right? But obviously Goddard could be out and Tyreek Hill could as well. So those are more realistic scenarios. But that's, I think, like if they just even didn't throw their tight end, I'd be more encouraged by Addison. But they do have a good tight end. However, they were a little run heavy. They were kind of run heavy for the first half of the season. So if the Vikings could go back to being one of the most pass heavy teams in the NFL, it might not matter.
I would not expect that with a rookie quarterback or first year starter.
Yeah, probably.
And one of their biggest transactions, even on a small scale in terms of what they gave up to get him, was acquiring a running back and beefing up their offensive line to run the ball better.
Yeah, Heath's breakouts, Jayden Daniels, Bo Nix, Chase Brown, Lad McConkey, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Rashee Rice. Jayden Daniels, go.
He is my number one quarterback in the projections. If you look at what he did in 3 playoff games, 315 yards from scrimmage per game. Those are Lamar Jackson type numbers. He finished last year as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. That's not the ceiling. The ceiling is that he's the best quarterback in fantasy football.
Bo Nix.
I generally think, and we talked about this at the beginning, that there is still room. Nix wasn't so good that we're expecting regression in year 2. He was still a rookie quarterback, and those generally get better. He only averaged 6.7 yards per attempt last year. You mentioned it, like with the rushing. He ran quite a bit, but the rushing efficiency wasn't quite as good as some of the guys who ran less or similar to him. So I think he has some room for gains there. Evan Ingram is an improvement as well, and I expect he gets a better wide receiver too in the draft.
I also would expect him to get a running back who can catch in the draft
or run
up outlet for him,
or run.
Yeah. I did a lot of research on the effect of a run game and how it relates to pass attempts for a team. In other words, teams that throw a lot, do they have bad run games? I can give you the results later if you'd like. Chase Brown.
I think you could make the argument that we already saw his breakout in the second half of last year. I love the fact that the Bengals have not made any real effort so far to add somebody who's going to take touches away from him. This is probably the most draft dependent breakout of all, but he could be right up there with Bucky Irving and Ken Walker in the round 2-3 range this season in drafts.
I spoke to Zach Taylor. I haven't gotten to that part of my, as Adam called it, my little recorder yet. But Taylor, I mean, the smile on his face when I asked him about Chase Brown, and the answer he gave, just how he grew into the role. You're right, Heath. And this is something Dan talked about because he was not convinced that the Bengals don't go draft somebody. Right. I would be shocked if they made a significant investment in running back, knowing all the holes they have defensively and all the money that they just spent offensively with still having Zach Moss on the roster, so he didn't really get a chance to, go from starter to backup because he got hurt. And I think, who knows when we would have seen the breakout for Chase Brown, but it would not shock me. I don't know if he can get that much better because he was so good, but if it could certainly be replicated because we saw Joe Mixon be a great fantasy option in this offense. Chase Brown could be a great fantasy option in this offense. It's tailor-made if everybody stays healthy, big if, but if everybody, at least, quarterback and receivers stay healthy, how do you defend this team? And if Chase Brown's catching passes, I know that's always your concern, Adam, because he doesn't play on third. He did last year, but will he play on third downs?
Yeah, not a huge concern.
Then it's, somewhat problematic, but he's one of my favorite players. I loved him last year, and just hopefully he does not get significant competition. But again, it would be surprising if that's a route that they go.
No, my concern is that his last 8 games, weeks 9 through 17, Chase Brown was the number 3 running back per game in PPR. He was on pace for just under 2,000 total yards, but also 81 catches. My concern would be they don't use him on third down. He's more like a 50 catch guy, something like that, and not an 81 catch guy, but certainly enough catches there And you know what? It's not like Mixon. Right? Mixon was, a 50-ish catch guy, didn't play on third down. Chase Brown is really, really good in the passing game. So they line him up out wide. Like he's a weapon.
That's something Taylor talked about, and he said, specifically, he's like, we knew he was good in pass protection, and he exceeded our expectations.
Oh, wow. All right.
And he's like Bucky Irving in that stretch that you talked about from week 9 through 17. So it's half the year for him. He played at least 80% of the snaps in every game.
Wow, yeah.
Oh, he was all they had, and
Right.
that's Dan's point, going back to a previous show, is that he doesn't think that that's sustainable based on his size, that he'll hold up. And, he did get hurt at the end of the year.
But it could
They'll
be.
bring somebody in.
Yeah.
They'll bring somebody in. But is it just a special teams break glass case of emergency type of guy like a Kenneth Gainwell? Or are they bringing in, hey, we're going all in on offense. Hi, Omari and Hampton, something like that.
Right. And there's a lot of running backs in this draft that they could do that with. They could take one of the Ohio State running backs.
Right.
I always defer to them as like the go-to in rounds 2, 3 for a team to get. But if they do, then that could obviously impact the playing time for Chase Brown.
Right.
It's what you started this off with, Heath. He is very dependent on what happens in the draft.
All right, Heath, back to you. Lad McConkey.
One of my favorite things about rookies, because I will say on this show a lot that full season statistics are generally more predictive than second half or random splits or Azer stats. But the one place that I go away from that is when you're talking about rookies and specifically rookie wide receivers in the second half of the year. We've seen countless examples over the years. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Rashee Rice, I think last year's first 3 games enough to show that was real. And Lad McConkey, holy cow. In his last 10 games, he was on pace for 99 catches, 1,500 yards, and 9 touchdowns. And then in the playoffs, he had 9 catches for 197 yards and a touchdown. He's a top 10 wide receiver in my projections. He's worthy of a pick in the first 2 rounds.
The only issue with the pace that you mentioned, you left out one stat, and that was his targets. He was only on pace for 124 targets in those last 10 games. So that's the only thing that holds me back, because it's like so easy to see him having a really good year, but is he going to end up being a second-round pick, like a late second-round pick? Hopefully he'll stay in the third round. But I just wonder, will they ever throw? I think it was the number I gave was like 31.8 pass attempts per game after their bye. They had a bye in week 5. Will they ever throw enough for Lad McConkey to be 150 target guy? Does he need to be, to be a true stud? You said top 10.
Right. I what I would say is, like, there were some games where there were target problems, but in that stretch, in the playoffs, he had 14 targets. He had a 12 target game, a 10 target game, a 9 target game, an 8 target game. Like, he had one game with 2 targets. He had one game that he left it early injured. I think he's probably a 140 target guy.
I completely wait. You're talking about within that 10 game stretch, he had a game where he left injured?
He had a game where he was inactive after. Are you saying that's just an Azer stat?
I think so. I mean, knowing me, I would be surprised if I put in a game where
he was still really good, but he missed week 13 with an injury, and he only played 63% of his snaps in week 12.
We missed week 13 and
game 12. Yeah.
Yeah. No, those count. I didn't count his bye week, but okay. Or the game left with an injury. Sorry. Yeah.
The Chase Brown comment I think applies here too. Do they add a receiver in the draft?
They had a running back and a receiver in the draft.
Could certainly do that. Harbaugh was asked when I was listening to him talk about Mike Williams, and he said, I didn't know Mike Williams. He said, first time I met Mike Williams was when we signed him. He said, but Justin was so happy. And he goes, that made me happy to see how happy Justin was. So if it's Mike Williams and a day 3 receiver, like Lad McConkey to the moon. There's been some rumors about maybe a Keenan Allen reunion, which would be awful for Lad McConkey, in my opinion at least. And if they go early at receiver, I think that would be awful also. So I think if I'm the Chargers, I'm looking at maybe a running back of the future, someone to pair with Najee Harris, if you're just talking about skill players, and tight end, because I don't think Tyler Conklin's the answer.
All right, 2 more for Heath. JSN, then Rashee Rice. Go ahead, JSN.
I think JSN's one of the obvious ones. DK left, Lockett left. basically the same thing at quarterback this year, could be amongst the leaders in target percentage, even with Cooper Kupp there. And if Cooper Kupp goes down, then he might just lead the NFL in target rate. Rashee Rice, kind of similar to what I said about Lad McConkey, is we've seen little stretches from Rice where he's shown just how good he could be, but we haven't seen it anywhere close to over a full season or really even over a half a season. But if you look at his last 10 games that he's played, it's basically 18 fantasy points per game. It sounds like he's healthy. There's no talk about the criminal case. I don't know whatever happened to that, but like a year later, we just don't hear anything. If he just plays 17 games next year, he should be right up there with McConkey as a top 10 wide receiver.
All right. That's going to do it for today's show. And by the way, the only wide receiver who averaged more fantasy points per game than Rashee Rice last year was Jamar Chase. Rice averaged 21.6 points per game in his 3 healthy games. Not going to
9.7 targets per game.
And Reed did say, feels like he's on track to be ready.
For training camp, though, right? Not
right.
for training camp.
Right.
Not for, yeah, well.
I don't care about minicamp if guy's coming off significant injury. If he's ready for training camp, I'm fine with it.
Okay, but like McCaffrey is going to be ready way before that. Just to put things in perspective, but we're worried if we're fine with Rashee Rice, but worried about McCaffrey. McCaffrey's way ahead of Rashee Rice.
Yes, if you're just talking about injuries, McCaffrey's also 65 when it comes to his position in age, and Rice is just at the start of his career.
Are you telling me that you would take Rashee Rice ahead of Christian McCaffrey?
No, I would not. I think if both hit, McCaffrey's more valuable at his position and overall than Rashee Rice, but I don't have to take them in the same spot. I could probably take both of them.
I think we should make a bet. And whatever that bet is, one of us has to draft the old team. Like we have in one of our leagues, have to draft like only players that are 29 years old
So we're all right. Here's the bet because it applies to something that's actually tangible to something that we did.
Okay.
And I'll let you decide because these were 2 players, one that I wanted, one that you wanted. Rafael Devers is yours. And you give me from this point forward, so nothing that they've done already. So you could wipe out what Devers and his crappy start. This is our fantasy baseball team. I wanted Jazz Chisholm. You wanted Rafael Devers. We took Devers. Chisholm went a couple spots after. I also would have taken Manny Machado over Devers. That was your pick. So you give me whoever you want, and you get Devers.
I'll stick with Devers.
No, you are getting Devers. You're giving me.
You pick.
I'll take Jazz.
All right, you get Jazz Chisholm. I'll take.
All right, so
I didn't know about the torpedo bats.
I mean, you could give Devers Bam Bam's bat at this point. He may not hit the baseball. So we'll go April 2nd. They have not played a game yet on Wednesday, April 2nd. April 2nd until August 1st.
Okay, and the loser of this has to. This is what
the loser has to take the all old team.
Fantasy points per game, total points, because I don't want to. It just can't come down to injury here.
Fantasy points per game.
Fantasy points per game.
Okay.
Not counting games where they pinch hit.
Not. You can Azer stat it all you want.
I will.
And then on July 31st, on August 1st,
because
we're not drafting it. On August 1st, we will the winner will give the loser a list of players they have to draft.
This is why we win awards.
Let's put it in a Word document and show it on the screen. All right, we'll talk to you all.
Like 10% so nobody can read it.
By the way, early show tomorrow. 8. What time are we going?
8:15.
8:15 a.m. tomorrow with our busts. See you there.